so happy we alive.
Good evening, and welcome to Louisville Late Night. This evening, we're at the Rudyard Kipling to celebrate the life and legacy of one of America's greatest writers, one of Louisville's greatest writers, one of the world's greatest writers, Hunter S. Thompson. Let's go see what's happening on the Hunter S. Thompson tribute.
Chicago Democratic National Convention, the dark and venal Nixon years and his subsequent humiliating departure from the White House, the hopeful Carter years when the country came close to decriminalizing personal recreational drugs, the fascist, using Mussolini's term of fascism as corporatism, the fascist onslaught of the Reagan years, further developed during the first Bush presidency, the Clinton-Lewinsky detour, and up to the president-select in 2000, and now our re-elected fortunate son, George W. Bush, whom HST described in King of the Sphere as a bogus rich kid in charge of the White House. In the editor's note for Fear and Loathing in America, the Gonzo Papers, Volume 2, Thompson's correspondences from 1968 to 1976, historian Douglas Brinkley writes, quote, "As a pure literary art form, Gonzo requires virtually no rewriting. The reporter and his quest for information are central to the story, told via a fusion of bedrock reality and stark fantasy in a way that is meant to amuse both the author and the reader. Stream of consciousness, article transcripts, transcribed interviews, telephone conversations, these are the elements of a piece of aggressively Gonzo journalism," Brinkley wrote. He then quotes Thompson saying, "It is the idea of reporting based on William Faulkner's idea that the best fiction is far more true than any kind of journalism." Thompson said in a 2000 Paris Review interview, "I usually just go with my own taste. I wasn't trying to be an outlaw writer. I never heard of that term. Someone else made it up." While an outlaw journalist might take a dim view of deadlines, paltry word counts, and expense account limits, he is not a criminal, say, in the way that a journalist is who outs a covert CIA operative. That's a felony, by the way, if anybody bothers to prosecute. An outlaw journalist is a stenographer to the powerful and would only run verbatim transcripts of White House press briefings to illustrate absurdity, never as a truth. But it's a postmodern world where a poseur like Gooker, Gannon, whatever his name is, can get day passes as a White House correspondent so he can transcribe Scott McClellan's remarks using the lame excuse, "If I am communicating to my readers exactly what the White House believes on any certain issue, that's reporting to them an unvarnished, unfiltered version of what they believe." On the other hand, Wally Dowd from the New York Times, who one might hope asked some tough questions, is denied access to the press corps. When Hunter had a press pass to the White House while covering Nixon's departure, he used the access to file uncompromising stories for Rolling Stone that are unthinkable in today's self-preservation-oriented journalism herd mentality. "The climate of those years was so grim that half the Washington press corps spent more time worrying about having their telephones tapped than they did about risking the wrath of a mafia-style administration that began cannibalizing the whole government. They swaggered into Washington like a conquering army. The climate of fear that engendered apparently neutralized the New York Times, along with all the other pockets of potential resistance." His comments about the neutralized gray lady during the Nixon administration could just as easily serve as a contemporary coda to Howard Friel and Richard Falk's convincing brief against the paper of record in their book, The Record of the Paper, which outlines the Times' inability and or unwillingness to consider numerous violations of international law in its coverage of U.S. foreign policy. As a maniacal freelancer, Thompson wrote for the Times Magazine, as well as Time Life publications, and a score of notable and forgettable periodicals. He wasn't interested in the life of a time clock puncher. He told Peter Whitmer, "Journalism has always seemed a good way to get somebody else to pay you, to get where the action really is." Like the old school journalists who called in 50-paragraph stories to the office, Thompson usually composed on-the-spot narratives from his notes. A reporting skill that takes tremendous focus, dedication, and a firm grasp of subject matter. Thompson's style was a direct descendant of the traditional method, but instead of 50 paragraphs, he'd submit 15,000-word screeds using the primordial fax machine, the technology of the fabled Mojo Wire. a low-resolution and low-reliability machine for transmitting text in the pre-personal computer days that has since been overtaken by wireless computer networks, text messaging on cell phones, and email. In this technological milieu, Thompson's most natural offspring are the bloggers. Highly personal, unfettered by so-called journalistic objectivity and deadline constraints, blogs are a vestige of Gonzo journalism that deserve recognition as part of Thompson's legacy. Author Barry Miles, whose recent biography of Frank Zappa follows other life stories of counterculture heroes such as Ginsberg, Burroughs, Kerouac, and McCartney, he writes, quote, Zappa is an iconoclast in the male American tradition of Neil Cassidy, Hunter S. Thompson, William S. Burroughs, Ken Kesey, Allen Ginsberg, Lenny Bruce, and the early Norman Mailer, unquote. The Heartland iconoclast was not just a psychedelic hillbilly drunkard, but also a keen intellectual, a brilliant political analyst, and a gifted, determined craftsman who persevered against tremendous odds to tell his readers that there are options for resistance, that we can send a message to the fixers and the greed heads, to say that while they will always be among us, we are not afraid to meet them head on, to speak our truths, and to stand our ground to the bitter end. He was an old, sick, and very troubled man. The illusion of peace and contentment was not enough for him. So finally, and for what he must have thought the best of reasons, he entered the shotgun. Hunter's closing words to a 1964 National Observer piece about a pilgrimage to Hemingway's Ketchum, Idaho, seems remarkably prescient. The man who wrote them would, like his hero, take his own life in a different mountainside town, a few hundred miles to the south, some 4 decades later. But his fans need not grieve over his final defiant act. Read longtime collaborator Ralph Steadman's tribute in The Guardian, UK. It wasn't a question of if, but when, Steadman wrote in his moving essay. We don't have to wonder what Thompson's last thoughts were. His suicide was a deliberate act, a calculated move by a man driven, as he often claimed, to control his environment, as an ultimate assertion of his individuality. In their public statement, his family called him a warrior, because his parting shot was a courageous act. In fact, it was heroic. Like a samurai warrior who committed ritual suicide in a formal display of courage and honor. Thompson leaves behind a remarkable journalistic legacy, unrivaled in the modern era, that chronicles the closing decades of the 20th century as well as the dawn of the new century in a raw, savage style that manages to wring out truth and brutal honesty without a trace of nostalgia or romanticism. The rebellion of the 1960s carried with it a kind of naive sense that since we were right, then right would prevail. We would stop the war and find better ways to live, he told Peter Whitmer. But he knew better, and that's why he interjected the word naive. He called on the power of the people's history of the recent past to remind us that there were precedents to show that we could stand up to tyranny. He wrote in his final Rolling Stone piece, "We were angry and righteous in those days, and there were millions of us. We kicked two chief executives out of the White House because they were stupid warmongers. We conquered Lyndon Johnson, and we stomped on Richard Nixon, which wise people said was impossible. But so what? It was fun. We were warriors then, and our tribe was strong like a river." Yes, but the river was dammed by the neocons, and polluted by the fearmongers, and drained by the greed heads, whose idea of morality is gutting the Bill of Rights. I can imagine that after 4 decades of chronicling the death of the American dream, and seeing things go from bad to worse, Thompson was bushed. Given a man whose lifetime fascination with intoxication was an integral part of his work, it's almost ironic that the best word I can use to describe my response to his passing is sobering. With all the stories that need to be told, all the chits that need to be called in, all the aggressive Calvinists who are seeking to supplant science with superstition, to sacrifice human rights for property rights, and convert the land of the free into the home of the brainwashed, Thompson's final gesture cannot be ignored. Thompson issued a wake-up call, warning of the cultural and political shitstorm that threatens our beleaguered nation and challenging us to awaken from the nightmare of history that has given the world George W. Bush and his cruel henchmen. I hope we have the courage to answer it. Selah.